would have got a second cookie. Those were good stuff right there. Hey, real quick, we want to keep things flowing, but we are doing something very exciting, very innovative, very creative, very systematic this year. Normally, we know, and we do it anyway at the local church, at the district level, we do it at every level, that we come up with some cheerleading and we get an exciting program and we say, this is what we're going to do this year, yay! And before we even get started, we say, all right, now here's what we're going to do this year, yay! So there you go. So this year, today is the beginning of a whole year emphasis about engaging the family, connecting with the family. We're going to be studying the book, Growing Young. And we have an amazing opportunity to share with you about this. What we're going to do is today is basically the introduction. And then if you look on the district calendar, there's 3 more steps, 3 more parts to this right here. We're combining the NDI convention. We're combining the Engage conference with the Iron Sharpens Iron pastors training. What we're doing is we're introducing it today, and then we're going to let you percolate with it, and then we want you to introduce it to your congregation. We're basically doing train the trainers type idea, because we know that all ministry is local ministry. Do you realize that? It's not happening in, if it's not happening in Nady, or if it's not happening in North Little Rock, it's not happening in Kansas City. And so every ministry. So we're wanting to empower you to do this at your local level, because that's where the ministry is. What we're doing is we're asking for each pastor and the discipleship point person to be plugged into this. And so today and also the next 3 ISIs, we're asking you guys to plug in. And then after that training, we're asking you within 2 weeks of that date, and we're going to be checking up on it. You're going to have to say, yes, I did, or no, I didn't, or lie. So we're wanting to train you to train your people. So we're wanting you to come to these, attend these, soak these up, and then within 2 weeks, pour yourself out on your local congregation to disseminate this information and spread it around. We're talking about growing young. We're talking about engaging the family. We're talking about reaching the next generation. The neat thing about this is it's not a program, it's a mindset. It doesn't cost you anything, and if it costs you something, it'll be minimal, but it'll be money that's easily raised and money that's easily spent because you're putting it into people, not necessarily a program. So we're very excited about this. So here in a moment, I'm going to introduce to you the speaker. He's going to be on Zoom. We are going to be able to limited ability to ask back and forth, but if there's a question and answer time, we'll be able to do that to some extent. And then at the end, Millie's going to come up and sing us out. So our goal is to be through well before 4:30. Well before, don't quote me on this, but we're shooting for 3:30. So if we go to 3:45, you have to forgive me if you want to go to heaven. So before we get into that, let me say 2 more things. One is most pastors, all pastors, should have gotten an email yesterday about Ministry Safe. The district has worked out a way to where every local church gets Ministry Safe for this year, and we can train our people. Everybody that's involved in children's ministry and youth ministry needs to go through Ministry Safe. It protects you. It trains your people. It protects you from anything that may come up. If heaven forbid, there's any kind of accusations or suits, if you can prove that you trained your people in this material, that's a line of defense for you. Plus, it's protecting our children. It's protecting our workers. Do you know that not everybody that wants to volunteer in children's ministry should be in children's ministry? So we have to do some vetting. The last thing you want is something to happen. And I don't want that. I wouldn't want to have to live with that. But if, heaven forbid, something happens, I want to be able to say I did everything that I could. And also, if you are working at one of our camps, I think this is required to work at one of our camps. So it's involved in that as well. So pastors, look that up. Schedule it as soon as you get home. Schedule the training. We're going to do it a couple of different times to accommodate everybody's schedule. So you definitely want to be involved in that. But this is an amazing time together. I don't want to draw it out too much, so I'm going to say one more thing. Then I'm going to introduce our speaker. Then I'm going to pray, and then I'm going to get out of the way and let him have as much time as possible. But Sunday school is so important. When I was growing up, there was an old saying that everybody ought to go to, and there's a reason for it. Because in a crowd, you can have a celebration, but it takes a smaller group to have a community. You can't connect with everybody in the big room, even though you know them, even though you like most of them, even though you like some of them. You can't connect with everybody, so we need to keep boiling it down. We need community. We've heard yesterday, we heard how people are vulnerable when they're isolated. But we also grow in accountability in times of connection, and that's what Sunday school and small groups happen. And with our numbers, with our counting, you can count anything that you're together. If it's the regular Sunday school hour, count it, get credit for it. If you have home groups, count them, get credit for it. If you have people that have a Bible study during the lunch hour at work, count them. Get credit for what your people are doing. But all of these different ways, all of these different options give people a way to connect, because we have to connect with each other. When we're isolated, we're in danger of not only what we heard about last night and this morning, but even for our soul. We're in danger in our own soul. Now, our speaker today is Andy Jung. He's with the Fuller Youth Initiative. He is on staff at a church. He has a heart for ministry and a heart for training. And pastors and discipleship point people, we're going to get to know him very well over this year. About once a quarter, we're going to meet again and walk with him as he walks with us through this. Now, with that being said, after we are done here today, I need either the pastor or the discipleship point person or somebody from each local church to meet me up front, because we have a gift for everybody, every church here today. So you definitely don't want to miss that opportunity. So let me say a word of prayer. We don't have an Andy yet. Okay. Okay. Now, is there a testimony? So we'll get him here in just a second. So I told him probably 1:30. So let's just sit quietly for about 2 more minutes. That's not quietly. Time to eat? Yeah, no joke. So, well, he will be here shortly, and it'll be a great time. Oh, did every church get a handout? We ran out of handouts. Is there somebody that didn't get a handout? Some church that didn't get a handout? Can we start distributing those? If you got an extra, can you pass it over? There's an extra right there that I don't see. We need a couple over here. Right here's a good one. Do you need pens? Anybody need a pen, a writing instrument? There's pencils on the back of every pew row. But if you're a pen person, I've got some pens. Let's take that poll. How many people like writing with pencils? Okay. How many people are pen people? Ah, there's my people. There's my people. Good. So I see that pencil. Pardon? There's a few more copies up here. There's a couple copies in the back if somebody needs them. Nothing yet. Technology works when it works. But this is being cost effective by Zooming them in. We're able to get 4 sessions with them, basically for the price of 1, counting the honorarium, the flight, the hotel, all of that. So anything else? Let me... Okay, he said he's opened the room 10 minutes ago. Yeah. Yeah, no joke. Yeah, no joke. Yeah, we're not at that point yet, though. Let's see if... I'm just kidding. Hello, Andy. How are you? Okay, we're working out the details on our end. There he is. Well, I've introduced you. This is us. And so I'm just going to, well, that's me. Hang on. Let's just pause there. Let me get out of the way. Okay, let's get
Institute's research on that we titled Growing Up. And so thank you for the invitation. Thank you for your interest in this. And most of all, thank you for loving on young people, because that's the most important thing. And we want to make sure that young people are cared for and are prioritized in a way that will help our churches thrive and grow and flourish as we move into the future. So let me share a little bit about Fuller Youth Institute. I believe Bobby has shared a little bit about my background, but Fuller Youth Institute is a research center that's part of Fuller Theological Seminary, based in Pasadena, California. We focus on researching youth and young adults in the church, and we help to turn that research into practical resources and training that can help and benefit the churches all across the country. And we've been amazed at how God has used our research to benefit the Big C Church around the world. And so we're grateful for that. As we look at this Growing Young research, I'm excited to just share a little bit about what we found and what we experienced. But before we do that, one of the things that is important as we look at what it means to be a leader is that Matt Capri, who was a business leader and also a Fuller trustee, would always remind us that the first job of leaders is to define reality. And so for the first few minutes, I want to help define what reality looks like currently here in the U.S. When it comes to young people, when it comes to young people and specifically teenagers in this case, is that we find that 1 out of 2 drift from their faith shortly after graduation. Within the first 12 to 18 months after graduating, 1 out of 2, that's 50%, would tend to either shelve their faith, in other words, putting their faith on a shelf in their dorm room or in their room or wherever they might be, or that they are walking away from their faith because it no longer is relevant for their lives. We know that it is relevant and it is something that they should continue the journey in, but they often find it something that they can put on a shelf. And this research has been done multiple times, and consistently we're still finding that 1 out of 2 young people tend to drift. We also know that further they get out from graduating in high school, we know that they tend to drop out of church. 2 out of 3 will drop out between 18 to 23. And these aren't young people that are not already involved in the church. We're talking about our church young people who are walking away from church on a consistent basis. And this is alarming for all of us, I think. We also know that in the U.S., the number of U.S. adults who identify as Christians is continually decreasing. From 2009 and 2019, we see a 12% decline in that rate in the U.S. And then subsequently, it should make sense that the share of U.S. adults who are religiously unaffiliated. We actually call these in the world of research, we call them the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, not our Catholic sisters, but the N-O-N-E-S, the nuns who do not have any affiliation to any type of religion. We saw those numbers increase from 17% to 26%, which is a 9% increase. And actually, the most recent numbers that I've seen, especially among the Gen Zers who are in their now 20s, we've seen this number in 2024 consider themselves as nuns, those who do not affiliate with any type of religion. Now, here's the thing. That is terrible news, and we know that that's a hard number to hear oftentimes for most church leaders. But what we do know is that these aren't all atheists or agnostics. What we know is that the majority of these nuns are theists. They believe that there is a God. It's just not the God in the person of Jesus that we believe in, but that they believe in a distant God who does not have a personal relationship with us. And so, in some ways, that is good news because, hey, they're at least a step in the right direction that they believe that there is a God and that it is an opportunity for us as the church to really reach out to those who consider themselves as nuns and really share the person of God, the person of Jesus in their lives. A couple of other slides here is that most Christian tradition in the U.S., including the Nazarenes, are either shrinking or holding steady at best. And we know that more of our evangelical brothers and sisters continue to maybe hold steady at best, but are not increasing in numbers. And so so this next slide obviously makes sense at that point, right? Decreased affiliation equals decreased attendance, and we're seeing that in our churches. That's why this topic is so important to us, is that we're seeing decreased attendance. We're missing people from in our pews and in our chairs, in our churches. What we also know is that this is somewhat generational. That we see this faith gap that we're noticing across the country. We know that the society generation, the oldest generation, generally those who were born between 1928 and 1945, our oldest generation that we have in the U.S. right now, that almost 85% of them would self-identify as Christians. Then the next generation, the boomers, they are also pretty high, but yet we see a slight decline in the amount of boomers who would identify as Christians. They're at 76%. And then we're going to skip to Gen Xers. Gen Xers. They're the forgotten generation. They're my generation, and I don't want to talk about my generation. We're going to go directly to the millennials, where we obviously have blamed all the world's ills on this generation, the millennials, who are now, by the way, entering into their 40s, who are now 42, 43, 44-year-olds, who, depending on who you read, all the way down to about 26 to 27-year-olds. That's our millennial group, and we know that the millennials, that 49% would describe themselves as Christians. So you can see the decline in the generations, and of course Gen Z, and now the newest generation, Gen Alpha, we're going to continue to see the decline in those numbers. In this graphic, it shows that 1 in 5 American young adults make up our population, so 17%. But what we know is that only 10%, 1 in 10 churchgoers are young adults. And let's be honest here. If we had 10% of our church to be young adults, we actually would be happy. I think this number actually gets skewed by churches that are just focused on that age group and that have a larger percentage of young adults in their churches. But in many of the churches that we are with and study, we know that 10% would actually be an improvement versus what they actually experience in their pews. So ultimately, what we know is that the church is graying. In other words, more gray hairs Kermode, who is a leadership professor at Fuller Theological Seminary, says this oftentimes, that the church is calibrated for a world that doesn't exist any longer. That the church is calibrated for maybe a culture that was found itself in the 70s and the 80s, but not necessarily the culture of 2024. But here's what we know at Fuller Youth Institute: we don't believe that this has to be our story. It doesn't have to be your story, and it doesn't have to be our story as a whole, because we believe that we can do different things so that we can end up with different results. So about 15 years ago, we began studying individual teenagers and their transition beyond high school and their homes. And we found, again, that 1 out of 2 young people were leaving the church shortly after graduation. And these are young people who have experienced church and youth ministry in our churches. And yet these were young people who were walking away from faith. And so we began to ask the question, well, why is this happening? And we certainly know that there's things that we need to do differently in youth ministry specifically. But we also have looked at, well, what is it about the whole system of the church that we need to consider? That we might need to look at and say, what's going on in the system of the whole church, so that we can help young people understand that they're part of the church at large, not just the youth ministry. And so what we did was we went into research. This is what we do. And we began to study churches that were already reaching and engaging young people well. So this is an exemplar study. It's a study where we saw churches that were reaching and engaging young people already and retaining them in the congregation. And that's how we define growing young churches. Churches that aren't shrinking and aging, but are growing and involving and retaining young people. And in our research group, we focused on ages 15 to 29. And that's the research group that we focused on. Practically, though, we know that this is true for ages 11 to 35 in most of our settings and in our contexts. And so when I say young people, think about our teenagers, our college students, and also our young adults, and young adults who are well into their 20s, approaching 30, and even beyond 30, as it is in most contexts. So the question that you're all waiting for us to answer is this, right? What does it take to reach young people today? And if I could just give you a sentence, if I could give you a program in a box and say, hey, this is it. Go and do this, and young people will begin to just magically show up to your church. I wish that was the case. And I wish I had a simple answer to what it takes to reach young people. But it isn't that simple, is it? If it was that simple, we'd already be doing it. But I want to approach this question actually from the opposite direction. What qualities do you not necessarily need to grow young? And what we found in our research is that it didn't matter the size of the church that you are, whether you are a church of 75 or 125, or if you were a church that was the size of 1,000 or 2,000. It didn't matter that what size you might be currently. It didn't also matter what location or the region, meaning what location within the city are you at? Are you a church in downtown, or are you in the rural section, or in the suburban section of your community? It also did not matter whether you were in the south, like you are, or if you're in the northeast, or if in the northwest, or in Southern California, where Fuller Theological Seminary is located. It also didn't matter whether you church has been around for 125 years. And we also didn't see the denomination matter, whether you were a Baptist or Methodist or Presbyterian or Nazarene in this case. And so the denomination didn't matter. So that should be good news to all of us, that no matter what our context might be, we can grow younger as a church, and we can do that in ways like we'll talk about here in a few minutes. One of the great things is that growing young isn't about just changing youth ministry. Certainly there's things that we need to do better in youth ministry, but growing young really focuses on shifting the church culture. And when we talk about culture, what we really mean is how we think and believe about our church. It's not necessarily our theology per se. Maybe it does have a theological component to it, but it's more about what we believe about ourselves, what we believe about each other, and how we interact with one another because of those beliefs. So it's shifting our mindset. It's shifting how we think. It's shifting how we relate with each other. So it's about shifting the church culture more than just changing a program. And you'll hear me talk about culture time and time again when it comes to growing young, because that's what it's really about. It's changing and shifting the church culture. So in our research, what we found was that there were 6 qualities or characteristics, and we call them core commitments in our research. These are 6 things that churches who are already reaching and engaging and retaining young people in their churches shared and had in common. Didn't mean that every church had all 6 characteristics or core commitments in their churches, but these were the common things that we saw in our research as we studied these churches. And what we've done is put them in a nice little graphic that we call the Growing Young Wheel. It's the Growing Young Wheel that has the 6 core commitments in it. And I want to talk through this wheel real quick, and then we'll talk about each of the core commitments. What's the most important part of the Growing Young Wheel is this: it's in the center. If it's not Jesus-centered, if it's not about Jesus, God, and the Holy Spirit, if it's not about the Trinity, then none of this really matters. And if it's not about God's people, then none of this really matters. So it's about Jesus-centered community that's in the center of this wheel. And on the outside of this wheel, it also makes a huge difference about the context. So everything that you hear today, you've got to think about it in terms of the context in which you're in. And every church has a different context. Every church has a different culture. It doesn't matter whether you're in the same denomination. It doesn't matter whether you're in the same community. Every church has its own unique context. And so you've got to contextualize everything that you hear. You cannot just place something that we know has worked in North Carolina, where I'm located. It may or may not work where you're located. If it's worked in the Northeast, it may not work where you are. What works where you are will not work in Southern California. So we have to contextualize everything when it comes to that. And that's why we focus on the characteristics of the core commitments as we talk about. Because it's important that it's not programmatic focus. Rather, it has these principles. It's principle based. And so think about it in those terms. So I want to continue as we talk about each of these core commitments. What we're going to do today is give you a broad overview of each of the core commitments. And then we're going to invite you to continue to engage with us. I see Pastor Bobby has already likely has shared kind of the long-term plan for this. But we want to do a broad overview, and then we want to go we'll start with the first one, which is keychain leadership. Keychain leadership is just one of those things where we really believe that it's one of the more tangible things that we can immediately begin to implement in your congregations. And when it comes to keychain leadership, it's about the enthusiasm of young people, and the enthusiasm of young people isn't the church's problem. It really is your church's solution. It's the solution that we all have been looking for, and we want to capitalize on the enthusiasm of young people that we have in our churches. When we talk about the keys, here's what we mean. It's the trust or the power and access of leaders who carry the potential to empower young people. It's about empowering young people to step up into areas of leadership that they're ready for. They may or may not know that they're ready for it, but it's seeking out young people where they have gifts and their interests and their passions, and inviting them into leadership in those areas. And so it's about the keys that we hold as adults, the trust and the power and the access that we have. So whether you're a pastor, whether you are a lay leader, whether you're a Sunday school teacher, whether you help lead a committee, whatever it might be, you have trust and power and access that most of the young people do not have. And it's about sharing all of that, sharing those quote-unquote metaphorical keys with young people. And in our research, the story that best exemplifies keychain leadership is the story of Stretch. This is a picture of Stretch Dean here, who we met during our Going Down research. And Stretch told us about his story, of how he got his start. He told us about when he turned 16, he, like every one of us, likely, when we turned 16, was at the DMV to get his license and to be able to drive of his own. And that day, when he turned 16, his parents took him and he got his license. And his parents said, "Hey, Stretch, now that you have your license, here are the keys to the family car. And today you can take it anywhere, go wherever you'd like." And so Stretch was an active part of his youth group, and he loved being at church. So he decided, well, I have the keys to the family car. I'll just go to the church to see what's going on there. And as he was driving into the parking lot that day, the preschool coordinator saw Stretch driving in and recognized that Stretch must have just gotten his driver's license. So the preschool coordinator went to Stretch and said, "Hey, Stretch, I see that you got your license. Congratulations. Would you like to help out after school in our preschool area and to make a few extra dollars?" And Stretch thought, well, I do need to help pay for gas. And so, yeah, I'd love to help out after school and help clean up and close down the preschool. And so he said yes. And then the preschool coordinator said, "Well, stay right there." And she went into her office, grabbed a set of church keys, and gave it to Stretch. And said, "Hey, Stretch, you're going to need these so that you can help close up at the end of the day as you work here." And Stretch looked at those keys in his hand, and he's like, only the special people at church get the church keys. The pastor, the church leaders have keys to the church. Stretch didn't realize at that time that really everybody had a key in that moment, Stretch thought he was fixed up because he now had the keys to the church. About a week later, Stretch told us that his youth pastor also dropped by and saw him at work at the preschool. And he said, Stretch, hey, I see that you have your license and now you're here working at the church for the preschool. I'm wondering if you could help me also. We had this soda machine. This is back in the days where we stocked our own soda machines. We don't do that anymore, but back in the day, his youth pastor was like, hey, Stretch, look, I can't pay you to stock our drink machine. Well, what I can tell you is that here's the keys to the drink machine. If you will just keep it stocked, you can have as much soda as you would like. And now, Stretch is thinking, I've got keys to the family car. I've got keys to the church. And now I have the keys to the soda machine. Why? I'll have it all. One day, Stretch told us that he had a particularly tough day at school. And he was in the church sanctuary, just sitting quietly, reflecting, and then in moments talking with God about his day. And Stretch didn't tell us that he heard God audibly in this moment, but he knew without a shadow of a doubt that God was speaking to him. And what he heard that day was this question from God. He said, Stretch, you like being here, don't you? And Stretch said, yeah, I love being here at church. For whatever reason, I love it here. And Stretch said, he heard God say, well, then just get used to being here for a long time. And today, Stretch is the pastor of that very church, the very church that he had grown up in, the very church that he had started as a helper in the preschool, as the one who was stocking the drink machine. And today, he is the pastor of that congregation. All through the power of keychain leadership, that he was empowered to take on leadership areas. And this is not to say that every person that we pull into leadership is going to end up in ministry like Stretch. But certainly, Stretch would not have experienced what he experienced his calling in a way that he did without the people who were investing in him and in his leadership. No, none of us would actually throw our keys at young people and say, hey, you don't need to worry about going through your driver's ed, and you don't need to worry about driving with someone who has experience. Here are the keys, and go and have a good time. We would never do that to a young person, a 15 or 16-year-old. But sometimes it feels like that's how we share a mentoring relationship, where we know that we have a relationship with them, and we know their gifts and strengths, and we say, hey, we see this in you, and we want you to come and do this with us. That is the type of teaching leaders that we want to see in our churches, and that's what we found in our research. So here's a question for us to reflect on just briefly. I wonder, is God bringing someone to your mind right now? A young person, whether it's a teenager, a college student, or a young adult, who might be waiting for some keys that they have shown some interest, have shown some gifts in, and might be ready to share with others. God has brought someone into your mind right now, and invite you to go ahead and write that person's name down, either on your phone or in a notepad, and ask God to open up the doors, to give you an opportunity to invite them into leadership in your church. The second core commitment is empathizing with today's young people. sometimes it's easy to buy into those labels. And those labels are positive labels generally, right? I often speak in rooms, looks like where you're sitting, and I would ask people, hey, what labels do we hear about today's young people? And it inevitably goes to they're lazy, they're entitled, they're snowflakes, they're always stuck to their phones, and so it's always kind of negative connotations, negative labels that we put on today's young people. Rarely do we hear labels like passionate, gifted, talented, justice-oriented, those positive labels where we know that many of the young people that we get to know have gifts and passions in. And so we sometimes think about the wrong labels of today's young people rather than the positive labels. So when we think about empathy, we define empathy as feeling wet, sitting in a curve, the idea of not judging. And those last two words are so important when it comes to this, right? When it comes to empathy, is that we've got to get away from judgmental thinking that we have about today's young people. It's this idea of sitting in a curve of a young person's life, celebrating their dreams and grieving over their despair. And so we're walking alongside them, journeying with them in their life. That's empathy. And what we know is that we can't assume that we know what it's like to be a teenager today. We can't assume that we know, just because we've gone through that same stage of life, that you can't assume that you know what it's like. Back in the 80s and the 90s, when I was a teenager, we really thought that this looked good, by the way, the dress and the attire. We can't, I can't assume that today's young people are experiencing their teenage years. Sorry about that. I'm sitting outside and a helicopter just went over. I'm sorry about that. I can't assume that our young people are experiencing the same teenage years that I experienced, because obviously times have changed. And what we know is that there's a different reality for today's young people, especially those in their high school year, college years, and early 20s. And for this generation, the pandemic, it was their defining moment, right? It really has made the greatest impact in their young lives, and it certainly has had a tremendous impact. What you'll see in this slide is that for the Gen Zers, that this had the greatest impact in their lives, pretty close to the millennials in this case. And the older they get, it has had less impact on their lives. What we also know is that technology has shifted and has increased, of course. 97% of today's teens use the internet daily on their smartphones. 95% of today's teens use YouTube in some way. 67% of them are on TikTok, and many of them are also on other social media platforms like Snapchat and Instagram. And what we also know is that the technology has led to a sense of loneliness for many of our young people. That 79% of 18 to 24-year-olds report being lonely. They report being lonely, and comparatively, only 41% of those 66 and older would consider themselves lonely. So there's a big discrepancy between some of the two loneliest generations, right? Our oldest generation and our youngest generations. And oftentimes we think that it's the oldest generation that will find themselves lonely, most loneliest, but it's really our younger generations who find themselves lonely. Even though they're the most connected group through technology, they're still finding themselves to be pretty lonely in their lives. And then Americans spend 16% more time alone each day than they did 20 years ago. Those are staggering statistics. Just a couple more staggering statistics here. Post-pandemic, 60% of teen girls report being persistently sad or hopeless. We know that mental health is an epidemic in our culture today, and especially for those who identify as LGBTQ young people community, and then 60%